I have a special guest for you guys today, and it's an interesting topic because the topic is spiritual handicap, and that topic is brought to you by Chief Yuya Anu, and he is an initiated priest in the Nigerian Ushan tradition and an advanced student of the IFA, presently ordered as well. He also has been working with the spirit world through various indigenous native systems for over 20 years as a spiritual counsel and guide. He is also the chief priest and temple head of Anu Nation, where he has initiated a cadre of students into Oshira tradition, as well as his own Anu spiritual order, and currently teaches indigenous occult and mystery systems, African philosophy and spiritual sciences, and divination to adults as well as children through his school, the Salud House of Spiritual Center, and he is definitely one of our guests today, and we want to welcome you to the show. I know I got those names all mixed up, but I know you're here to correct me, so welcome.
Oh, give thanks, sister. Thank you for having me here.
So let me get your name correct first. I see that I want to talk about your name because you have it spelt in such an interesting way, and only you can tell us that from your spirit. What does your name mean, and how do you pronounce it correctly?
Okay, my name is Yuya, and spelled Y-U-Y-A, and it means that his powers will be added onto. Okay, Yuya. My title, which many people think is my name actually, is Haru, which was a title that was given to me many years ago. But when you see the Haru and it's in all capitals like that, it signifies a deity. Okay, so it's a stamp of approval, from a higher place. And Asan is where we get the word assassin, but it speaks to the rebellious ones. It's the rebellious freedom fighters. And Anu means the people from heaven, the people who have come down from heaven.
Nice. I love it. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. This is my husband, Professor Sabat, is on with us as well.
Well, greetings, brother.
Greetings, my brother. An extraordinary moment to always have one of my own that looks like me, right? That absolutely has the type of spiritual generosity to share with us. And the depth matter, right? And honors to you, sir.
Yes,
thanks for that.
Welcome to our show. I want to go ahead and just give you the invisible mic, I like to call it, put you on the world stage, and let you go ahead and chime in on your topic, spiritual handicap.
Sure. Well, the topic really speaks to I think something that is almost somewhat an epidemic within the community of those who are seeking for higher spiritual awareness and elevated perspective, elevated thought. And a lot of people are operating at a handicap, and they're growing frustrated, at the lack of development, lack of growth in the quote-unquote what we call the conscious community, or the community of those who consider themselves to be awakened. A lot of times we'll find that people get into a high level of costumery, and regalia, and down to what they're wearing, what they call themselves, even what they're eating, and these things are investments that people make in their external body to cover up the lack of growth and development that's happening in their internal body. Okay, and a lot of times they can't figure out, well, I'm applying these things, I'm learning new things, I'm reading these ancient books, I may have even gotten initiated in certain ancient scriptures, but I'm still struggling with the same exact vices that I was struggling with before I came into my consciousness. And there's certain things that we can do that will handicap us when we're coming into this quote-unquote new world, or going across this new portal of understanding. there's certain perspectives that we could have that will completely distort the entire process and pretty much voiding out all of our work. One of the main things that sits at the center of that idea of spiritual handicapping is the fear that we bring into the spiritual arena. Oftentimes it's the fear of our own power or our supposed power, or of the whole rearranging of our world stage. There was some years ago, I remember speaking with an artist, it was many years ago, who since transitioned, but it was an artist by the name of Heavy D. He was a rap artist, was out years ago. And we were just talking about spirituality and different things related to, awareness and growth. And I had some paperwork. I had thoughts and philosophies of Marcus Garvey, thoughts and opinions. And I had some other stuff. And, I was saying, hey, check this out. And he said, no, I don't want anything to do with that. And he said, and I said, why? He said, because I know that right there changes lives. And I would have to change everything about me that I am in order to get into that. Or if I got into that, it would change me. So a lot of times it's just fair that once our world view, our world perspective, and the walls of reality that comprise our world are rearranged and changed, that there'll be no room for us, even though we're the one changing it. But there may not be room for the identity that we currently have, the persona that we currently have. That may have to fade away. That may have to lose its place in order for this new expression to come forth. And that fear is such a challenge, Also, one of the things that we tend to handicap ourselves with is this incessant desire to compare ourselves with other individuals. And ultimately, what we end up doing is we end up emulating those individuals, thinking that if we can walk in their footsteps, then we can acquire what they've acquired. And this is how religions are created. Religions are typically created by people who recognize that they have a social and genetic handicap and dysfunction. Not typically, but sometimes. Let me say that. Religions are sometimes created by that. And they'll view other individuals who have a more sincere, authentic, and correct connection with the Almighty, or correct connection with the natural world, or correct connection with divinity. And they'll say, hey, if I can do everything that they do, get up at the times that they get up, eat the foods that they eat, maybe even intermingle with them, breed with them, if I can do everything that they do, then I will be as them, okay? And this is the basis for many of what we'll call world religions. It's nothing but emulating people who are of a higher order, okay, because of that fear of showing and being one's authentic self, and where that may place you in the ranking, or in the chain, in the spiritual and social food chain. So again, this brings about what we'll call a spiritual handicap. Not only is it fair, but also what I talk about often with students and just people, ego. People probably hear me use that term a lot, ego, because in essence, it's your greatest enemy while you are embodying this human form. Ego is Satan. Satan is your human thought or your brain. And ego, your brain, is what gives you this premise and this identity of who and what you are. And that becomes such a problem in your spirituality. In the same instance, your ego will try to stop your spiritual growth because it knows that the more this individual invests, develops, and implements their spiritual tools and spiritual psychology, the less the individual will need the human psychology. So the brain becomes less of a factor. Your scholastic ability and accolades become less of a factor. Your academia becomes less of a factor because of the fact that you've now fed into your spiritual and your soul reality, okay? But the handicap comes in place when you're trying to still maintain the grip of logic and the grip of human thought. You're trying to maintain your footing there and keep it within this creative and out-of-the-box, beyond cyclical spiritual kingdom. And what happens is that you now become spiritually retarded because of your attachment to your quote-unquote intellectual or logical brilliance. Okay, it makes you a spiritual retard. So the handicapping can happen in several ways, but, and really just outlining the idea, the topic of the concept, I would say that those are the two main ways in which that occurs. It's through the cultivation of ego, and of course, once ego is cultivated, relied on, it becomes the premise for one's navigation through the world, then fear is right there, because the ego is constantly in fear of dying. The ego is constantly in fear of being battered and bruised and no longer being relevant in your lives. And that's the human brain not wanting to be in a place where it's no longer relevant. It always wants to be relevant. And it doesn't want to accept the fact that its only job is to be a gateway. Your brain is just to be a gateway to higher awareness. It's not supposed to really conceptualize abstract thought and things that will really evolve you, because it doesn't want to evolve you. It wants to keep things as they are. It's only to serve as a cosmic gateway, and it hates only having that job. The brain wants to design exactly who you are and what your world is to be. So that spiritual retardation that I speak about is the premise for the idea of the spiritual handicaps.
That's very powerful, brother. I was absolutely walking on that pathway of thought that you just demonstratively said. Let me ask a question. When I was listening to you in terms of the brain's aspect of how to look at things or perception or those things, the brain is just one organ, right? And yes, we have billions of minds. Is that correct?
Yes, certainly.
Absolutely. So we certainly don't want to inhibit it by kind of thinking with the trends and the fads and the normal aspect of how people view things themselves. And it's sort of like you saying, being retarded from a spiritual aspect of naturally allowing your resonance to do what it does when it's righteous and you're availing yourself to follow the flow. Most people can't do that.
Right. And I want to add on to what he was saying as well when it comes to ego, even though we know, the Bible was coded, but there's parts in the Bible where it talks about, humbling yourself. You will not enter the kingdom of heaven unless you become as a little child. I look at that as if it's like you have to humble yourself even in that ego perspective, because all of us are around each other to learn from each other. But if we just know everything and it's like, I know, then how do we know that one, question that we've been trying to get answered is not trying to be answered, let's say, for example, by our children? If we're steady having so much pride within ourselves that we'll miss it. Another aspect to that is lack of knowledge. They may not be aware of, different aspects other than what they've been shown, growing up on television or just hearing it from something that they've heard from a friend of theirs. So there are several aspects to that. So thank you very much for sharing what you've shared. But, yeah, we can look at that at a 360-degree circle, because there are a lot of things that people can, look at to say that it's spiritual handicap. But then I have to ask a question. If you're not aware of the spirituality or aware of the different aspects of spirituality, yes, I can see that as a handicap, but how can people out there who are not aware that they're spiritually handicapped, or how can there's some tests they can take? Is there a way they can find out? Is there some things that they can do? Can you share a little bit on that?
Well, the first thing, you have to monitor your growth. Understanding that one of the problems that a lot of times, especially nowadays, people begin to dive into spirituality because they want to glorify their consciousness. People will read certain books or watch certain documentaries just so they can have something really deep to talk about, or try to become a leader in a certain community because they know a lot. Okay, so once we understand that the ultimate goal and the ultimate attitude that you're supposed to take on with your spirituality is you're supposed to develop an unconditional love affair with the learning of what your soul is. It's unconditional. It has nothing to do with being able to put yourself out there and be the next lecturer or the next smart person or whatever it is that people are aiming for. But there should be evolution and growth. And more importantly, your learning should be challenging you. And what I mean by challenging, it should be challenging your perspective to the point that maybe what you're learning may even agitate you and make you feel uncomfortable a bit. One of the things that you mentioned, and, it's a perfect starting point. You spoke about, people not being able to enter the kingdom of God unless they come as babes or as children. Well, the important piece with that is that the science of the child, or even the baby Christ, in that Christian paradigm, what it basically was speaking about was the silence of a person. Because when you have a child is nothing but an observer of life. It doesn't cast judgment. It doesn't cast opinion. We're talking about the baby. It doesn't cast judgment or opinion on what it sees. It accepts, and it really just observes. And through that observation, one becomes wise of the thing, because they're now looking at it from a holistic perspective, as opposed to trying to find the polarity that they can conceptualize and then feed back to the world in an elaborate statement. Okay, so
Absolutely.
One of the things that people want to look at is, do they have the ability to be silent in the face of spiritual teaching, spiritual growth? Can they be silent about it and digest it and synthesize it? So I would say that would be a good question for individuals to ask. And like I said, often people are very aware that they're not growing. They cover it up through the regalia of the conscious look or the conscious sound. But it's just a covering to hide the fact that they still have these dysfunctions and these vices that they won't really address and accept, because they don't want to lose identity, especially once you start covering yourself up and piling on layers of ego. You now then at some point have to reveal to someone or reveal to the world that you really don't know what you're doing. It's kind of like an individual who has a business and they just kind of fell into it, and they don't file taxes because they're afraid to let an accountant look at their books. Because at that moment the accountant looks at their books, somebody in the world is going to know that all this time you didn't even know what you were doing. And that's just too shameful for some people to actually have to expose. And
right.
that's the problem.
That's powerful what you said. Even in that aspect, I want to go back to what you said about going within, the silence. I guess that's really the true identity theft, which is lack of knowledge of self. Because when you go within and you sit within that little black box within your mind, that's when you can truly tap into spirituality. Because I always tell everyone, yes, there's all these different degrees out there for doctors, lawyers, judges, teachers, you name it. Those are all the mundane things. But I know we didn't come to this planet to be teachers, doctors, lawyers, judges. Each and every one of us has a gift. We have a talent. We have an ability that we have come into this plane of existence to project to the world during these times. So how are we going to be able to become aware of that if we're too busy looking at what someone else is doing outside of us, or try to be copycats of what they're doing, versus going within and even bringing a new invention to the platform, especially during these times? These are great times for manifesting things, especially with thought.
Or, and on another level, you may have just come here to, the person who used to come and put the cape on James Brown served a purpose.
Yes.
everything. People have to be able to accept that and understand the dignity and divinity and even things that seem to be very lowly. You know, not everyone is going to come out. And that's the science of, even if we look at the zodiacal chart, you know, you have certain signs like the Cancer, and that crab, it's in its shell. And everything that it processes from internally. You know, if you ever look at a crab eat, it takes its claws and it rakes things into it. You know, it doesn't poke out and go reach for things, but it rakes inside of its own little safe comfort zone. And then it processes what it wants from there. And then you have other signs like the Leo. The Leo jumps out, hunts, and goes and gets what it wants. You know, so one is not greater than the other. There's different ways to process and express that purpose. And it's like you said, we all have a unique one, but some people are really challenged by the idea that theirs may not seem from a societal perspective as important as another's. You know, and again, that's ego at play, ego at work, wanting to just retrace steps because the ego is so afraid of something new that it will keep you from exploring that or even exploring yourself from a new perspective. One of the challenges sometimes, and you've probably even experienced that, sometimes when you start helping a person or explaining things to people who have that handicap, the first thing they'll tell you is what kind of person they are. You know, you'll say something, they say, well, yeah, I get that, but see, I'm the type of person like this.
Yeah.
You know, and creating themselves, they're crystallizing themselves in an identity that they refuse to move from. Or they might even say, well, you know, I'm a Pisces, and you know how us Pisces are. You know, they keep throwing themselves inside of that box. These are handicaps, reliance, you know, on religious systems, zodiacal systems, anything that tells you what you're supposed to be like, it's handicapping you, it's crippling you.
Yes, I agree. I completely agree because even let's take the zodiac, for example. People just look at the sun sign and say, oh, I'm Sagittarius or I'm Capricorn. You know, what about the moon sign? And then did you know that there's actually 12 stages to each sign? I mean, they don't even, you know, there's deeper knowledge. There's things that we have been kept from us because we've absolutely been taught not to think, you know, like, you know, for example, what my husband always talks about, whatever you put on that, the teacher puts on that chalkboard, you better mark it down, you know, true or false. And if you mark anything other than what's on that chalkboard, then you're going to, you know, get it wrong because we've been in a programming system. And anything that has to do with spirituality, especially when you start coming into a spirituality or even, you know, throughout a lot of our lives, we've known that there's always been some type of deeper knowledge, and we've been told, you know, don't ask questions, and we've been afraid to go within, or, you know what I mean? There's just, it's so much to the matrix. But I like the topic you chose. I like the topic you chose, spiritual handicap. What made you choose spiritual handicap? Now, I think this is interesting because the young lady that was setting up the show for us, I didn't hear back from her on right before I got ready to, you know, to put the topic up for the show, and I said spiritual science. I was going to name the show, but right before I clicked it, I called her. I said, you know, I was going to name it spiritual science, and she says, oh, he's on the other line. He's going to call it spiritual handicap. And I think it's very interesting how we both said spiritual. I was like, okay, we're on the same page.
Well, actually, what happened? I'm currently traveling, and I had stopped because I was trying to think about, you know, what I wanted to speak on, and I had stopped at a rest stop, you know, off of a freeway, and I saw like. I was going into the bathroom, and I saw like 40 people going to the bathroom. I'm like, what the heck? You know, everybody's going to the bathroom one time. So when I got in there, I saw everyone. I said, okay, it must have been a van. Everyone had on the same T-shirt. And I looked at the back of the T-shirt, and it said Special Olympics. And it was about 30, 40 Special Olympics participants. And the bath, they had their gold medals and everything. So I guess they were traveling as a group. And I'm looking at the medals and some of the things that were written on the shirts. And more importantly, they were helping each other in the bathroom because, different ones had different challenges. And this particular group looked like they may have had maybe some emotional and mental challenges. But I'm looking at, they look at these shirts and these medals, and I'm saying, man, I wish I would have been at the event that they were at, whatever they were doing, And when I was looking at them helping one another, you could see the level of self-realization that was going on, the pride that they were wearing these medals with, And I was saying that there's a certain freedom here because they're not bound by what academia has told them. Sometimes you find people who have gone through educational processes that are not like the mainstream, like what we may call special education. They come out much more brilliant because they don't get the same level of seasoning and conditioning that the average person receives. Okay, so they're able to really self-actualize. They wake up in the morning, they put a tablecloth over their shoulders and say, "I'm Superman today," and that's it. They're Superman, and you have to respect that. They're not going to answer to anything else, So there was a level of self-actualization, self-realization I saw there, and I realized that these individuals would be much more open and much more adept at spiritual things because every day for them is a process of self-actualization. Every single day is also a process of challenging themselves beyond what they were able to do. Like some of them were helping each other go to the bathroom. The challenges were at that level, as opposed to other individuals who have layers of programming or, like you say, matrix seasoning and conditioning where they just think they have it. I got this. So it made me think about who's really spiritually handicapped,
Right.
So that's what I thought.
Absolutely. The things that you were definitely stating is very relative, especially when you look to even speak in terms on ego. But spiritually, and having an awareness of the natural ability to adjust and adapt to things comes with a self-actualization and a self-awareness, like you were saying. And they certainly have it at its natural instinctive form, being in a special Olympic mode, especially if it's a psychological or mental challenge. They basically, like you're saying, they're just loving life and living accordingly, naturally, how they deal with the aspects of their awakened state on a daily basis. And imagine if everybody was absolutely at the humble state of awareness to do just that, to naturally and spiritually allow the present moment or you resonating in your awakened state and being open to make adjustments or adaptations to any thought process, mental acuity, as well as spiritually sensing you being awake. And I love the way that you've absolutely given us an indication for some of the things that we really need to ponder in this aspect to really kind of associate ourselves with that peace and that divinity that's within all of us, like you were saying. And to have a clear awareness of that certainly takes silence. You've got to be quiet. And a lot of times our minds are racing so much with that mental chatter, as well as a lot of times people are conversating so much they can't stop to allow some other things to come into that flow. They're drawing in intelligence or communications because they don't understand that there's a thunder in silence. Being quiet and observant like that baby that you were speaking about is an absolute tool and asset for clear expression and understanding. And those are training tools for training to think. And we certainly need to apply those as well. It got to be quiet, got to be silent, got to be observant to even be aware of the clarity that's needed to get understanding. And you hit that right on the head, bro. I really appreciate you being on this show tonight. That's a wonderful epiphany for me, certainly. Nubian?
Yes, if you guys have any questions for Brother H. Yuya Hashan Anu, please press 1 on your phone, and I'll be happy to pull you in. You know what I wanted to do? I wanted to go back to what you were talking about with, these students that were in the bathroom, and they had different handicaps, and it just looked like, people that, you just want to be around, but, each and every one of them had different handicaps, and some of them had, to be led by certain people because of their stage of handicap. And I like to look into the metaphysics of what you said, and to me, what I see is that each and every one of us are around each other for a reason. We've been here before. We've have business with one another. We have to complete that business. But what is happening is we're dealing with a society of our own kind that absolutely have issues with each other because they hate themselves. And what's interesting about the spiritual handicap of you titling it because of what you saw in this environment of all these different handicaps that were going on, it's just like what's happening to us right now. We're all around each other with all these different handicaps going on, but we're failing to realize that each and every one of us, that people that are around us are here to help us to get past that handicap or to grow from that handicap or to stand up from that handicap or to walk from it. But we're not able to do that because we're too busy pulling each other down from the stairs, talking about each other, hurting each other because of ego, and we don't even realize that the knowledge or whatever we need to help us in this hour is in every single person around us. But we're too busy judging them because of how they're dressed or what they look like, or they don't have enough money, or they're not driving a Bentley, or her weave is not straight, or because she has a weave, or whatever the case may be. But we're all missing the point because we're looking at it with our eyes versus through our spiritual eyes. What are things that are righteous? What are things that are true? What are things that can help each other, that can truthfully help you? Because truth be told, you've been asking for this in conscious experience. And because you've asked for it, how do you know that all those people that are around you are not trying to show you different aspects of what you asked for, but you're missing it because of ego? Thank you very much for this title.
Sure.
I think that this is an hour where we absolutely have to be paying attention. And if we're paying attention and we're on our P's and Q's, and just like, Brother was saying, if we go within and we sit within that little black box, and you'll be so surprised, you sit there, all these different things will come out of spirit, have a walk with your ancestors, have a talk with yourself, you'll be surprised. Just, work within your Akashic records. Deal with self, and you'll be surprised. Get a little notepad and a paper and sit there next to yourself, and, you'll be surprised what you come out with. You can come out with a business, a new song, a beautiful painting, healing within your body, any of that, because we're all worthy of greatness.
One of the things that happens too in our quiet meditations is that for some of us, we realize how much dysfunction is present. A lot of people don't like to meditate. They don't like to be silent, and it's like the brother said. They're conversing so much that they won't stop conversing. They won't be quiet for a moment to listen to the other voices, their voices. But the other aspect too is some people don't like what they hear when they go quiet. You start to really get an opportunity to observe your own thoughts, maybe some of the sick, dysfunctional, warped things that fly through your head that you just don't really want to admit, because you've talked so much mess about other people and other cultures. Some of us don't really want to admit that some of those same things are inside of us. So we keep posturing and signifying and speaking about all these different things that we have about us that are great and wonderful, and never want to express the other side of that polarity, the things that are not so great, the things that are maybe anti-natural or wicked, and that's a part of what also comes from that silent time that allows you to move beyond it. Again, as you reference the individuals I saw, they have to look in the mirror every day. Theirs is the reverse. They look in the mirror every day and see the challenge. So they have to look inside to see the beauty. Now, if you've adorned yourself with all these images of beauty as you see it and made yourself look like a deity and a god or a goddess, and you have that pseudo presentation going on, then that means inside we must be seeing the opposite. The other polarity must be in it. You must not look so great on the inside. And that's what sometimes comes out in those silent moments that people do not want to face. Sometimes your spiritual instincts are shot. A lot of times people speak about they want to rely on the instincts, and the instincts won't lead them wrong. Some people have destroyed their instincts by allowing their spirit be too wayward. We have a soul as well, and the soul is your compass. The soul is your anchor point, and the spirit can actually, just like you have disincarnate spirits in the world, the spirit can actually fall in love with the world. You see this in even movies with ghosts and goblins and Dracula. They always have this love affair with the flesh. Some people have even experienced this in their own homes with incubus and succubuses coming into their bed to have sex with them in the middle of the night, because these spiritual entities are in love with the flesh. Well, our own personal spirits can be confused in the same way, and they can fall in love with the somatic experience of life. So where you want to really clock and link into and sink into is your soul energy, because your soul is so indifferent that it doesn't even get the opportunity to retard. It doesn't get the opportunity to get blemished or to get dirtied up or to even fall in love with the world, is because it doesn't touch the world. And the Yoruba system, we have three entities: Orunmila, Obatala, and Oduduwa. And these entities represent almost like what you have like the Trinity, but they're the energies of all-knowing, all-powerful, and ever-present. But these actual entities don't touch the planet. They don't touch the earth. Many people are familiar with Obatala. He's the one in all white. He's the king of the white cloth. And what that also signifies and represents is that he's not touching and interacting with the earth reality. He doesn't have an opportunity to be blemished like we might be blemished, or like our personal spirits may be blemished and tainted. So sometimes that's something else we have to acknowledge, because a lot of times people will go inward and go inside and still come out with the same ridiculous answers because their spirits are misaligned. They refuse to align their spirits with their soul energy. And that's, we're not only cultivating the character and the sharpness and the agility of our wit and our minds through our human journey, we're also cultivating our spirit and the metal and the things that our spirits are made out of. We're developing spirit and hoping that our spirit can help guide us to our soul mission and not guide us away from it. So there's a couple of things that people might want to take a look at, when they're going inward. But you also don't want to disregard those thoughts that come. Just because they don't look like higher thinking, they don't look like Buddha thoughts or divine thoughts, doesn't mean that you should just throw them out, because they're yours. They're in you. They're your demons, and they're the things that you need to deal with. And by ignoring them, then you crystallize yourself further into the identity and the personality of someone who is spiritually handicapped, because you become spiritually insane. That insanity of ignoring what's present. The whole world is messed up, it's not me. Trying to do the same thing over and over, expecting different results. A lot of that comes from ignoring the part you play, your spiritual accountability, in designing the life that you actually have.
Yes, I totally agree. And also I wanted to go into one of the very most important aspects of spiritual handicap, and that is diet. Can you touch a little bit on diet?
Sure. Diet is critical because you always want to make sure that, well, first off, you want to recognize that your body's a vehicle. Your body's a vehicle for spirit travel, number one. Spirit can do nothing on its own. Nothing. As much as we think spirits are, destroying the world and doing all kinds of things, no, it's your flesh that's doing that, as motivated by your spirit. So in the same instance, if you want to do greater things, you have to have a vehicle that could sustain that. If you want to do things at a high level, even, physically, you get a car, you get a bike, or whatever it is that if you want to do mountain biking, you get a good, strong bike you're not going to mountain bike with a tricycle. Okay, so it's the same thing when it comes to spirit. If you want to affect all of this great spiritual evolution and change in the world, you have to have a top-notch vehicle. And your body is that top-notch vehicle. Okay, so now let's speak about, like you said, the food, the diet, or the eating patterns. Wherever it is that you originate from, or where something originates from, it needs that same thing in order to survive and flourish. So your spirit originates within the spiritual kingdom. It needs spiritual food to thrive. Your soul originates in that realm that you spoke about, the Akashic realm, or that the ethers that we also speak about. So it needs that in order to be strong. Well, your body itself originates on the planet. Even though it's designed by your spirit, it originates here. So it needs planetary implements in order to survive and flourish. It needs natural things from the planet to survive and flourish. You got to also understand that your body is a biospiritual mechanism. So what that means is when we look at your blood, for instance, blood is not just something that, carries oxygen throughout your body. Blood is not something that just quickens thought and animates things within your body. But blood actually carries your spiritual power. That's how it flows through your body. Okay, so whether you understand that spiritual power as chi, or you understand it as prana, or moyo, or ashe, or power, whatever you want to call it, it actually moves through the blood. If the blood is dirty, if the blood is sludged up, if the blood is blocked, if arteries are blocked, power is blocked, spiritual ability is blocked. Now, we all know, there's enough information out here right now. We know that it's the fried foods, it's the synthetic foods, it's the processed foods, and things like that dirty up the blood. You want to look at it just like a river you're polluting. And your blood are rivers of life. They're rivers of light. They not only carry oxygen, they carry information, spiritual information that will evolve you. And if the blood is dirty, then the spirits won't even inhabit. The brother said, well, don't we have billions of brains? Of course, we have billions of cells within our bodies, and those cells are generated based on our thought forms. Our thought forms are generated based on our spiritual momentum. Okay, so you might have good, strong spiritual momentum, but if it doesn't have a strong or healthy vehicle to sit in, such as a healthy blood cell, then it's not going to sit there. You're not going to receive the spiritual blessings that you're supposed to have, or the spiritual intellect and wisdom that you should have, because your body is not suitable to accommodate that level of power and dynamic energy that comes from the spiritual world.
Yes, absolutely. We have a comment in the chat room from Danger Remy that says, foods affect your ability to think accurately. We are suffering from inaccurate thoughts. What do you say about that?
That's absolutely right. Yeah, we eat a lot of foods that actually are neurodisruptors, and they affect your ability to think accurately and also to feel, desensitize you. Certain things that we call foods that are not actually foods. A lot of times we're just we're ingesting viruses. Okay, and if we're not thinking or feeling properly, then we're not really. It's just like someone may have a headache, and they'll do something like they'll take aspirin or Tylenol or whatever things people take for headaches, and what they're actually doing is they're numbing the symptom, but they're not really listening to what their body is telling them to address. Okay. So now the body starts to scream out even more, I'm really in pain here, or there's really a problem here, or you're really dehydrating me. So then other things come after that. So Absolutely. It's the same thing what the person just said, certainly. It affects the accuracy of the messages that we can receive and the messages that we can transmit. Sure.
That's very powerful. That's what Dr. Bay always tells us as well. People are taking aspirin for these headaches and doing other things, and the body is absolutely signaling them to engage themselves in recovery the proper way by not cutting off that signal to the brain telling you that you have a headache, and that's absolutely on point. We need to really get a sense of the things that are happening with us and our capabilities of having all the tools to develop this resolution by paying attention. And certainly that mind chatter has people in a place where they're distracted a lot of times because they're hearing themselves talk while someone is sharing information with them as well. And that ego is protective of being comfortable in certain spaces and certain places and don't want to move from that place or get outside of it because of, like what you were saying, fear. And people have a tendency to be immobile even in terms on determining some things they need to make changes in because they're afraid of those very changes or they're comfortable where they're at as well. Yeah, food certainly is it. We got a serious battle with these health challenges and the foods and the dietary issues and nutritious things that we're going through right now, our people, because of habit and because of so-called tradition.
Yes, absolutely. We have another question in the chat room. What are some foods that clean the blood?
Okay, I'll give you some simple ones that you can get, right in your store. Garlic is excellent. Onions are good for blood. And this is why, again, in the vampire movies, garlic chases away the vampires because it removes the filth from the blood. Okay, it makes the blood uninhabitable for malevolent energies, not only spiritual, but energies that would try to harm the body. Okay, whenever you're looking to clean the blood, you always got to start with the liver. You want to do a liver cleanse. You want to start with your bowels. Okay, make sure that you're cleaning out your bowels. You're having good bowel movements. And that's just you're not necessarily just looking for foods that will make you have a bowel movement. Some of the foods that make you have a bowel movement, though you feel like, okay, this is good, this empty me out, but a lot of times it's very damaging to the body. It's like a violent thing. You'll eat certain things that are very high in fiber, and it's basically like just eating a bunch of twigs, and then you push that down your throat, and then it pushes everything out of your system. You say, okay, that was good, but you cause a lot of havoc inside of your body. So some really light things, like I said, garlic is excellent for cleaning the blood. Cranberry, real cranberry juice. It's a little rough to drink. It's kind of strong. You can mix it though. You can dilute it a little bit, but that's excellent to cleanse the blood. Black seed grapes are also really good for the blood, as are beets, red beets.
Yes, perfect. Thank you very much. I also want to let everyone know that, cooked foods is the number one reason for our health challenges. For example, when you cook your food, imagine cooking your food and leaving it on the stove. If you leave it on the stove for 2 or 3 days after you cook it, then you don't want to go back and eat it. Well, that's what it's doing to the inside of your body. But if you have a bunch of fresh fruits and vegetables that are cut up nicely, on the stove, and you leave it there for 2 days or even a week, you can still go back and eat it. Well, that's what's happening when you consume live foods inside of your body versus cooked. So if you can just imagine that picture, every single time that you cook your food and you put it inside of your body, that's what's happening to your system. Food, the same thing that would happen with the cooked food left on top of the stove for 2 or 3 days or a week. That's what's happening in your system. And it's very vital for us to clean out our system, especially detox is very important, but not just your lower colon, your upper colon is very important to, clean as well. I very, very much thank you so much for coming on our show. And I want to do something that I like to do at the end of every show, and that is I want to hand you the invisible mic, which is the world mic here on Nubian Newz with the Z. And as I hand you this mic, can you please tell our listeners out there? Now, remember, we have listeners all over, not just here in America, but we have listeners in Ghana, Nigeria, Japan, France, you name it. I give a shout out to all my listeners overseas, and thank you very much for helping me to spread the news. And I'm going to hand you the world mic, and can you please share with our listeners out there, if you can tell them anything, just one thing that you had the mic and you want to share with the entire world, and you had one chance to share it, what would it be? I just passed you the mic.
When you expire from this planet, when you go, one of the things that the main thing that you want to make sure that people can say about you is that they knew you. Forget about the accolades, forget about you built a park on this corner, or you built this building, or you have money and Cadillacs and all of the things that we may look at as signs of success. You want individuals to say that they knew you, they knew who and what you are and what you were. So that way also when they're connecting with you in the world beyond, they're connecting with the real you and not the false persona that you gave people to digest. So that's what I would say to the listening audience.
That's beautiful. Thank you very, very much. Powerful. Powerful. That reminds me of my brother.
Thank you so much, my brother. Very powerful. And thank you for being who you are, a wonderful adept, and your divine wisdom is absolutely a necessity at this time. Appreciate you. Honored.
Thank you. I'm very thankful.
And we want you to return back and visit us again, and, always come and, let's sit and cipher with the masters. I love it.
Sure thing. You got me.
Thank you very much. And can you please tell our listeners how they can find you?
Sure. Individuals, I have a school by the name of Sadulu House, and they can go to saduluhouse.com, which is SADULUHOUSE.com. And I also have a blog talk radio show as well every Friday by the name of Enlightenment and Transformation. They can always go to that website, enlightenmentandtransformation.com. And there's episodes and archives and articles and everything up there. They want information.
Yeah, I love that. And maybe you can work it out to where you can start giving discounts for people or something who come your way and say, hey, I heard about you on Nubian Newz, and that way we can collaborate and start doing business with each other, because I can definitely shoot some people your way.
Certainly. Well, we have that in the works. I'm surprised my team hasn't contacted you about that yet, but I'm sure they will soon. So we actually are already we have a affiliate program already in play. So we'll make sure you get that information.
Thank you, my brother. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful, great brother of ours for our listening audience, just to be able to knock the brains out of falsehood with a different aspect of who and what we are is absolutely divinity and ascension at play. Thanks so much, my brother. You certainly are not the stereotypes and cliches that audio and video print media tend to flex on us about. Honors.
Yes, absolutely. And it reminds me, too,